Revelations 2, starting at 14. But I have a few things against thee, because thou hast there them that hold the doctrine of Balaam, which taught Balak to cast a stumbling block before the children of Israel, to eat things sacrificed unto idols, and to commit fornication. So thou also them that hold the doctrine of the Nicolaitans, which things I hate. Go ahead and be reseated. You know, Sunday morning I started getting into the doctrine of Balaam and Balak, the story of that, and I will very briefly go through that. But Balaam was a prophet. There's a lot of theological debate on Balaam, but he did hear from God, but he also was a soothsayer. He was also someone that spoke to the dead. He done a lot of other stuff that was demonic, along with also hearing from God. So he was kind of like one of them people that the best I could explain it is he was on the fence. And we even seen that the donkey, the ass, spoke to Balaam and told him, and seen that the angel was there and told him, said, "Don't go. Why are you keep hitting me? Why you keep whooping on me?" And then so Balaam's eyes were opened, and he seen the angel with the sword standing in front of him. And so, the story is with Balaam that if you look at it, that just because someone is not living right doesn't mean that God cannot use them. Now, what I mean by that doesn't give you an excuse to go out and live any way that you want. What it means is that God will perform His work and will perform His duties to make sure that His will gets performed. Because on the flip side of that, there will be people that will stand before Jesus Christ one day and they'll say, "Lord, Lord, did I not cast devils out in your name? Did I not heal the sick in your name? Did I not do all these things in your name's sake?" And Jesus will look at him and say, "Depart from me, you workers of iniquity. I knew you not." So, with that, that's kind of how that we can explain Balaam. He was one of them that just because God spoke to him and used him doesn't mean that he was right in everything that he was doing. So, but anyway, because Balaam was for hire. Because at first when God spoke to him and told him not to go, and he said, "Them people that come out of Egypt, they're my people, you leave them alone." So Balaam went back and told Balak's servant and said, "No, I ain't going to touch them. God said don't touch them." But Balak kept a-going, kept a-pressing on him. And he finally Balaam give in and took the bribe money to curse God's people, which he could not curse God's people. So what Balaam done was he figured out how to set a trap for God's people. So when the Bible says that I hate the doctrine of Balaam, what he is saying is I hate people that will set up, or their practices, not people, but that people's practices that will set up a purpose stumbling block for others to fail. And so that's what Balaam done, was he purposely set up a stumbling block. He purposely set a trap and taught Balak how to do it. And there is very little tolerance that Jesus has for that. And so we see this, that this is the work of Satan in every believer's life today. So the doctrine of Balaam is working in every believer's life today. I want you to understand that. The more that I started looking at this, and because Satan is purposely looking to send people or things or objects into your life to set a trap for you. If you believe and you honestly believe and profess Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, the doctrine of Balaam is going to come against you somewhere in your life to try to knock you off track. That's just the way the devil does. The devil's got a target on you. He's not going to let you alone. He's after you. And the quicker that we understand this, the quicker we can get on our feet and we can fight the right fight. So often we spend all of our time fighting people and not fighting the doctor of Balaam that is trying to set a stumbling block in our way. It ain't the people, it's the demonic forces. It's Satan that's working behind the people that's trying to do this. Deuteronomy 11:16. It says, "Take heed for thyself that thy heart be not deceived, and that ye turn aside and serve other gods and worship them." So right here it's telling us that Moses was writing in Deuteronomy here. He was telling the children of Israel, he said, take heed to yourself, pay attention to yourself, evaluate yourself, that you don't fall into a trap being set by the enemy in your life. See, the book of Deuteronomy, and most scholars, as I studied the book of Deuteronomy before, and they all believe that God gave the book of Deuteronomy to Moses in one day. Because in multiple places in the book of Deuteronomy, Moses writes, this day, and it never changes. He refers to this day all the way from the book of Deuteronomy, from the very first chapter to the very end of it, on this day. And then they believe that shortly after that day is when that God took Moses up. And so as if you look at that and you read it with that kind of understanding that Deuteronomy was written at one time in one sentence or in one setting through the Spirit of God to Moses, Moses knowing that he was fixing to go home to be with his Lord, with God, and so he's poured out through the Spirit on this day the last things that they need to know. The things that Joshua needed to understand and needed to know as he took the realms and had led the people. And so one of the messages that Moses was given through the Spirit was take heed to yourself and don't let your heart deceive you. You know, I see so many people today. As a pastor, and over the years of me pastoring, even though that it's only been about 7 years, I cannot tell you the amount of people that I've seen that their own heart has come in and deceived them and they fell away from the walk that they had. So, I mean, that tells us that we need to constantly be evaluating ourselves. That's why David fell. We all know the story of David, right? He got up there, he should have been out in battle. Instead of being out in battle, he was laying in bed. And so then he woke up late and he's lazy and he took himself out there and he sees Bathsheba taking a bath and he lusts after her. He calls up for her and then he lies with her. She gets pregnant and then he has to cover it up, so he kills her husband by sending him on the front line. I mean, one disastrous decision after another disastrous decision. So when it comes to the book of Psalms and we see David, he said, "Oh Lord, search me, try my heart, and see if there any iniquity that it be found in me." See, David had already learned that his own heart could deceive him and could lead him astray. And so he wasn't even going to trust his own self anymore. So he would get before a holy God and say, "God, I think I'm okay. I think I got everything under control now. But just in case I don't, God, you search me and try me and burn it out of me, God." See, church? He realized that there was a doctor of Balaam that was working against him to deceive his own heart, to set a stumbling block in his own life. And so we got to be careful, church. We got to be careful. We are living in the last days. We are in the last of the last of the last days. And in 2 Timothy, I think it's in chapter 3, verse 1, you know, Paul, he's telling Timothy there, he said, "These days are perilous." or in these last days it will be perilous. That right there where it says last days, that word last there is eschatos. And that's where we get our English word for eschatology, which is the study of the last of the last of the last of the last things. So he purposely used the word eschatos there in that writing, referring that we are in the last days. So, I mean, we got to be careful, church, or we will fall into the stumbling blocks of these traps that are being set. Judges 2:13, it says, and they forsake the Lord, and they served Baal and Ashtaroth. Ashtaroth was, and when I started to study this out, all of the, and there is demonology, the study of demons and stuff, but he is part of the demonic trinity. And with Lucifer, so which Lucifer is Baal, is referred to as Baal, but anything that God has, Satan has an exact opposite of it, and so he is part of that third trinity, that demonic force that is there. And so, but anyway, so I started looking at what was Baal, you know, knowing that that was Satan, that they referred to Satan or Lucifer as Baal. They referred to Satan or Lucifer as Zeus and stuff. So, but I started to look and I started to think, what is the doctrine of Baal? What is the doctrine? Because I knew that it meant to do satanic worship. Because when they had the worship of Baal, they had in Kings, it said that they had a golden statue of a man, and its head was as a bull, and it was made out of bronze. And they would, in its arms, they would hold its arms out, and it said that they would pass it through the fire, and they would pass the babies through the fire. And what they would do is they would lay the firstborn child of a family in that bull's arms, and they would have a big fire going, and they would push that bull with that baby's arm in that baby or that bull's arms and push it in there and cook and kill and roast that newborn child as a sacrifice to Baal. So I started to look and I knew that this, and so some of the things that I started to write down was, what is the worship of Baal? What is Baal? And Baal is an anti-God. So Baal, the worship of Baal, is an anti-God, because what I want to bring out is just because that we don't see somebody here in the United States passing children in a bull's arms through, that there is not the worship of Baal that is going on right now. Because see, the worship of Baal is still going on. You know what I thought was also interesting? Was I started to also, because the worship of Baal was to sacrifice the firstborn child of a family. And as I started to really research this and to give this up, do you know that in the women's rights movement that's over abortion, that they say, and that it has even been, and I don't remember the lady's name that's over the head of the women's rights movement, but she has had had a necklace on, and she had this emblem on it, and she even made reference that the abortions were offerings to Mother Earth. And that's happening right now. So if you don't think that children is being offered up as a sacrifice and a worship to Baal, so we got to understand what Baal is so we can recognize it. Because see, church, we have allowed all of these practices to happen in our country because we don't understand what something is. Right? Because if we understood what was going on, and if we actually understood that these people in a demonic realm are doing these things and they believe this and they're saying this, we wouldn't have any ounce of support or empathy for them. We would know how to pray for them. We would know how to do warfare in God's kingdom for them. But yet we're ignorant to these things, aren't we? So I started looking. Baal is an anti-God. Baal is the worship of anything that is against God. Anything that is against God. Well, I'm going to tell you, we live in a country right now that is one of the most liberal countries for religion on the face of the earth. But yet, we are losing our grip of that liberties to worship and serve God as we see. We're losing it, church. It's slipping out of our hands every day. And so, it is the worship that misdirects the true worship to God. So the worship of Baal, who Baal is an anti-God that will create an atmosphere of worship to misdirect the true worship from the true God. So anything that will misdirect worship, you could say, is the doctrine of Baal. And so here was some of the things that I also, looking and studying in the children of Israel and going through and looking and studying about the worship of Baal, some of the other things that I recognized, and I started to see some parallels with this church, and I'm starting to get, I've been, with this eyes and this mindset that, oh dear Lord, help us, but my eyes are even becoming more opened every day that I study this. And I'm going to get alarmed if y'all don't get that kind of revelation as I do too. But if you can, here is also the worship of Baal. It's an anti-God, but it is a way that they create their own God. The worship of Baal is where you create your own God. And here's the thing. If you can create your own God, you can create your own truth. Think about that. If you can create your own religion, then you can create and you can dictate what that religion is based upon. That means that you can do or not do what you want to do based upon what you set the rules at. And so, you get to make up your own truth instead of the truth of God. So the worship of Baal is creating your own God, creating your own image, creating your own idols, and making up your own rules any way that you want them to go. So how many people, somebody come to me yesterday and they were talking to me and they said that there was a church that is in LaFleur County that believes it's okay, and they teach that it is okay to smoke marijuana in their church. And they asked me what I thought about that. And I said, that sounds like the doctrine of the Nicolaitans. Because I'm going to tell you, church, in LaFleur County. Now, in California, we would expect some kind of crazy talk like that, right? Yeah. But in LaFleur County, a whole bunch of people that's gathering together and paying their tithes and all coming together and worshiping Jesus and raising a holy hand to Him, and yet they're teaching people that these practices are okay. And we're not talking for medical purposes. We're talking for recreational. So let's just cut it down and let's just call it for what it is. So, if you can make your own religion, you can make your own rules. So if I believe that that's okay and you want to agree with me, then it's okay, right? If we want to make a rule that says that it's okay to fornicate, we can do whatever we want, we can have any kind of a lifestyle that we want, and y'all want to agree with me, then we can make our own rules, right? If we want to talk and we want to say that it's okay to drink and go out and party, and if I want to make that rule and y'all want to agree with me, and we call it okay. Does anybody have a problem with that except me? Because see, if we can dictate what we want to do and we make up our own rules, then what's to stop us in the moral absolutes? What would stop us to saying that the next thing to do is then let's make sacrifices? And then so we start going robbing the kids as pets and make sacrifices. And then what would make us keep from changing our rules to going and getting children now and making sacrifices with children? See what you got to see where it gets dangerous when you start making up your own rules? We sit here and we go, well, that's kind of far-fetched, but I'm going to tell you it's happening all over the world. It's dangerous when we are given the opportunity to make up our own rules. But see, here's the difference with Christianity and all of the doctrine of Baal or the worship of Baal. Because the worship of Baal is also anything that you want to worship and how you want to worship it. And here is Christianity. Christianity is the worship of one God, the true one God. Jesus said in John 10:30, He said, I and my Father are one. So Christianity is worshiping Jesus as God, as one. Because Jesus even said, I and my Father are one. He said, if you want to see the Father, then you look at me. And if you see me, you've seen the Father. And so, Christianity is a worship of one God. Are you with me? And that sets us apart from the worship of Baal. But if we start cutting the absolute truths out of here, and we start watering them down, and we start changing them, and we start doctoring them up, then before you know it, we have the form of godliness, but we're denying the power, we're denying the truth that is there. If we do not work and search our own hearts, if we don't go before a holy God and say, God, search me and try me and see if there be any iniquity found within me, God. I am serious about this walk I have with you. I am not playing games. I really want to sell out to you, God. But God, you're going to have to search me first. You're going to have to try me first. You may even have to put me through the fire and burn some things out of my life. But I'm going to tell you, church, I'd rather have that prayer any day of the week than to live a life that is a lie before the true one God. And find out that it was a lie when that last trumpet sounds. John 14:6, Jesus saith unto him, I am the way, I am the truth and the life. And no man come unto the Father but by me. See, that's the difference in between Baal worship and in between Christianity. If you're going to profess to be a Christian, then you're saying that I know that there's only one way to God, that's through Jesus Christ, and that's passing through the veil of the Holy One. And I know that to be an absolute truth in my life. So if you say that you're a Christian, you are saying that I believe these things as an absolute truth in my life. Come on, church. I got 2 or 3 of you. I tell you, I feel the presence of the Lord. I think I'm preaching better than you're shouting. Somebody needs to give me a hug. Say, I love you, Pastor. See, but here is the worship of Baal is paganism just watered down. Paganism. So what is paganism? Paganism is the universal belief that says that every way is right and everything that is called God is right. That's what paganism is. Did you hear that? Because I'm going to read this again, because I'm telling you, when the Spirit of the Lord was giving this to me, I'm telling you, I was sitting here and I was repenting, not only for my family, but for the church, and I'm repenting for the nation and our state that we're living in. And I'm saying, God, forgive us for what we have made this thing, God. Forgive me for any part that I have had in this thing of this nation turning to the way that it has. Paganism is a universal belief that says that every way and everything that is called God is right. That's paganism. So when we're studying the church of Pergamum, and it was the paganism capital of Asia Minor or of the Roman Empire, what it was they had thousands and thousands and thousands of gods. And every one of them were right. That's what they believed. The early church age, paganism was a universal religion. The Romans allowed the freedom and the worship as long as it was paganism. I think one time that I said that there was over 300,000 different religions in the Roman Empire at one time. Over 300,000 religions in the Roman Empire at one time. And every one of them had their freedom to worship any way that they wanted. See, but here's the thing. Even though that every city had multiple temples and they had multiple gods that they worshiped, every city was known for one major god that they had. You know, when we were studying the city of Ephesus, their temple was the temple of Artemis or Diana. The Greek god or the Roman goddess was Diana, but the Greek one that they knew it by was Artemis. Artemis, the temple of Artemis, was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. And that was their one. They had hundreds and hundreds of temples in the city of Ephesus, but their major one was the temple of Artemis. Pergamus. We get to Smyrna. Smyrna had Sybil, had the temple of Sybil. They had hundreds of other temples, but the temple of Sybil was their main one that they had. Pergamus had Zeus, the altar of Zeus. And so that every city had its own one. But here was the thing. Everybody had the liberty to worship whichever one was their favorite god. So, and what they would do is they would usually live close to or in proximity of the god that was their favorite. So if Zeus was their father, it was their favorite god, they would want to live close to Pergamus or close to Laodicea. Because there was also a temple there dedicated to Zeus at Laodicea. If the Artemis or Aphrodite was their favorite god, then they would live close to that temple. And in their homes, you would go in there and then you may find that they have multiple shrines, little clay pots of these different gods representing them. But their favorite god, they would have a big shrine or a big idol of their main god that they would have, their favorite one that they would have. And every house can be different because they had the liberty to choose what they wanted to worship. Except the only choice they did not have was the emperor worship. Because what they believed was the Romans believed that the spirit of God, when a guy becomes Caesar, become emperor, that God's spirit would come and infiltrate him, making him a living God. So therefore, every person that was in the empire would have to bow down and worship him as God at least one time a year. And one time a year, they would have to go before the governor of the province or the city or wherever they was at. They would have to kneel down. They would have to say that Caesar is Lord. And then they would give them a signed document saying that they had made that profession, that they had to keep that document on them at all times. And if they were caught without having that document of making their annual pledge to Caesar and calling him God, they could suffer tyranny or death. And so that was the only one that was optional. But they only had to do it once a year. So in the order of paganism, they did not think that that was bad. Because, okay, one time a year I have to go down, I have to bow down and tell that Caesar is God. But he isn't my favorite God, but I recognize him. But I don't have to have a statue of him. So I can have a statue of my favorite God in my house. So I have no problem of saying that once a year, as long as they let me worship any way that I want to my favorite God. That's paganism and the liberty of paganism. So, we get to the title of the message, where the title of the message was, Are You Intolerant? Because see, here was the problem. Because the Christians would not go and they would not bow down before the governor there in the province and say that Caesar was God. They knew that there was only one true Lord, and that was Jesus Christ. And they could not make any other profession than that. So everybody in paganism around there looked at them as being intolerant. They looked at them as being bigot. They looked at them as being troublemakers. They looked at them as being, they looked at them as stirring up trouble. They looked at them as being, making an alliance that made no sense to their God. And the more that I thought about this, that the Christians were seen to be arrogant, simple-minded, closed-minded, offensive, bigots. They were seen to be prejudiced. And that's how they looked at the Christians, because they would not bow down. So if you went in a Christian's house, you would not see any of these idols. And what I thought was interesting was that they seen them as being in a form of atheism. Because when they would go into a Christian's house, there would be no idols in the home. And so they looked at them as being unholy. Now, the more that I started to think about this and the more that I've seen these parallels, I started to think, oh dear Jesus, does that not sound like the Christians today? What are they saying about Christians today? If you're a true Christian and you stand up and you make a profession of your faith, what are you seen? You're seen to be intolerant. You're seen to be simple-minded. You're seen to be closed-minded. You're seen to be arrogant. How can you say that you know the only one true God? How can you even have the tenacity to say that you know the only way? And they tell Christians these things. You have celebrities and politicians that stand up and they'll say, well, there's multiple ways to God. All paths lead to God. You have Oprah that goes under her program and has made it mention multiple times, and Oprah has said that she believes that there's multiple ways to God. And that there's no right way and there's no wrong way. It just has to be a personal way. And if you choose that Jesus be it, then that's fine. If you choose Muhammad, then that's fine. If you choose Allah or Buddha or whatever, if you choose a light bulb or a grasshopper, that's fine. Because all paths lead to God. That's right. You know how many people watch Oprah? And then you got politicians that will come out and say the same thing. Well, we got to have the separation of church and state. I want to tell you something about the separation of church and state. The separation of church and state by our founding fathers was never meant to separate the church out of the state. It was to separate the state out of the church. And it's backwards now. But anyway, because Christians had this belief, they were seen to be troublemakers and to be cruel and unreasonable. I'm going to tell you this, and my daughter confirmed this, but our children is being taught that the Bible is just a book in school that is out of date and obsolete. It is no different than the Quran. It's no different than Muhammad's writings. It's no different than the writings of Buddha. It's no different than anybody else's writings. They're being taught this. Now we know why our colleges and we know why our children stand in the streets and they riot and they do the things and they act the way that they do, is because they've been taught these things their whole life. And we have sat by as a church and we let them do pagan worship. We have let them do pagan worship, church, because anything that said that it was the right way to do it was okay. And we have allowed that doctrine and that belief to happen with our children. We have not stepped up as parents and grandparents and drawn a line in the sand and say, look, I don't care what the rest of the world says. My word says right here that Jesus Christ is the way and the only way. And if you have allowed that, then you are part of the problem too. I can tell I'm really doing this upright for y'all and that you're loving me. 1 Timothy 4:1, it says, now the Spirit speaketh expressly that in the latter times some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrine of devils. I'm going to tell you, our children are walking away from the faith that they've been raised in because somebody else is telling them that they don't have to live like that, and they're drawing them away with seducing spirits, making it make sense to them. Oh me or oh my. That is a seducing spirit that is working and drawing our kids away from the truth. When I was talking to Michelle, she said that when she was in college, it was some of the hardest spiritual fights that she had ever had, because she had all of these teachers in there telling her that the Bible was not true, telling her that the Word of God was not relevant, telling her that everybody, that if you believed it, that you were closed-minded and simple-minded, and that you were narrow-minded. Every day that she went to school, every class that she had professors pounding that in, and she had all these kids agreeing and cheering on the teachers. And she said it was the hardest thing that I ever had to do, Dad, was to keep my faith through that. Because the devil would come into my mind at night and would tell me and try to seduce me away and try to get me to believe the lies that they were telling me. We look for it to be a good thing to send our kids to college, and it is that they go get an education. But I've even talked with Mandy, which just got out of college, getting her master's degree. And even going to a Christian university, she said she faced the exact same fights, even in a Christian university. We are being seduced. We are being drawn out to paganism in every facet of our life. We look at it and they say in school, well, if you're going to worship this God, then you must worship that God. So your kids are allowed to pray in school. They're allowed to do that as long as they're willing to pray to all the other gods too, so they don't offend the other kids. Yeah. Now we are fortunate and we live where we do, where this is not a daily fight for our children. But I'm telling you, we have been asleep at the wheel, and it's closing in on us every day. It's getting closer and closer, because that same doctrine of Baal is drawing in to draw out away the true worship, and we are a target. You look at the modern day churches and they're being drawn away, and you look at the people, they're struggling in every facet of their life. You would be lying if you didn't tell me it was a fight to get here tonight. You would be lying if you didn't tell me that there was 100 reasons that went through your mind today of why that you shouldn't come. That is the doctrine of Baal. That is the spirit of Baal trying to set a stumbling block. That is the pagan worship saying, well, you can stay home and worship. You can stay home and listen to some praise and worship. You can stay home and read your Bible and you'll be okay. That is paganism. And if we don't recognize it for what it is, church, it's going to engulf us and we'll end up closing the doors and this neighborhood will not feel the sting of us anymore.